La conférence aujourd'hui va se passer en anglais. Donc, the conference today will be in English because Janet, I think it will be easier for you. Janet, let me introduce you. Janet, you're an agile testing coach and process consultant with Dragonfire, based in Alberta. Janet?
Yes.
You're the co-author of many books, a lot of them with Lisa Crispin. One of your book is the Agile Testing, a practical guide for testers and agile teams. Was edited in 2009.
Yep.
And your specialty is in showing agile teams how to test activities, how testing activities are necessary for the whole team. The whole team approach is something that you develop for good quality products. You work with teams to transition to agile development and teaches agile testing courses worldwide. You contribute to many articles and publications, and you enjoy sharing your experience at conferences and user group like us today.
Yes.
So thank you, Janet. And now I let the people enjoy why they came for.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So everybody should be able to see it now. Good. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking, and yes, it'll be in English. My French is pretty much non-existent besides, some high school French. I can say bonjour, and that's kind of about it. So I won't even try. I could understand some of when you were talking, and I read cereal boxes quite well. But that's about it. All right. So let's talk. So we're going to talk about holistic testing and quality and how that fits in. So Jean-Francois gave a nice introduction, so I won't repeat that, but I want to tell a little bit about me because that helps, I think, to people to understand where I came from. So I started as a programmer. I went to university as a mature student, and I spent about 6 years programming, and then I was promoted to QA manager because I was one of those programmers that I was very lucky in my first job that I had an amazing team that I worked with, and they really emphasized testing your own work and making it quality. And it was with the Vancouver Stock Exchange, so it was really important that things worked. But I was promoted to QA manager because I was constantly complaining about the process and the lack of testing by the other programmers. It turned out to be a really bad company to try to do anything because they really didn't want to. So I left that company and I kind of went back to testing and to my roots, but I started speaking about testing because I was very fortunate when I went back into testing and not being QA manager to be on an agile team where I really learned what it meant. And so started speaking and doing conferences and working with teams, different teams throughout, mostly in Calgary at the time. But then I started writing. As Jean-Francois mentioned, my first book with Lisa was 2009 is when it was released. That's a long time ago. Since then, I've written 3 other books, hard to believe. But I think it's important for people to speak out and to share their knowledge. And that's really what we've been trying to do. And my focus has always been about quality. So this is a quote from Edward Deming, 1982, long time ago, right? That's when he did that business effectiveness in his 14 different quotes. This one, quality is everyone's responsibility. Improve quality, you automatically improve productivity. I like this quote. However, the idea of productivity gets lost and people take it very weirdly sometimes. So I kind of change things up a little bit. And this is my quote. I think if you focus on quality, that the speed or the productivity will naturally come. But when you focus on speed, or if you focus on productivity, the quality gets lost because you're trying to go faster and you're not thinking about quality. So if we build quality in from the beginning, all that other stuff almost comes for free. So today, I want people to walk away with really thinking about quality, but realizing it's much more than testing. I could do a half-day talk on quality, easy. But it's important to think about it from a holistic point of view. And so that's going to kind of be where we go this today. Quality, and just kind of, you can raise your hands. How many folks have had a conversation with their team about quality? Quality of their products, quality of their process. Yeah. So a few, and that's great, but it's a hard conversation to have because people often don't know the words that they want to put around quality. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to do a little bit of audience participation. I was going to have a poll on this, but what I would like you to do is everybody bring up their chat so that you have it available. We're going to do a little bit of interactive things today, and we'll just use chat to kind of go through. So I want you to look at these cups of coffee. Normally, I'd say if I was doing this in person, think tea or something else, but look at these coffees. Which one would you choose? Which one is the best for you? Just put it in the chat. 1, 2, 3. 1s and 3s, 2s. Yeah, a variety. I see. Whichever one. Yeah, but which one do you prefer, right? And so when I've done this other places or other times, it seems to be unevenly split. People have different preferences. Some like it plain. My favorite, I would choose number 1. I like mine plain and I like it black. My sister, on the other hand, she chooses number 2. That's her favorite. She loves lots of foam in her cappuccino. That's her favorite. But I want you to, when you thought about that, when you looked at these pictures, did you consider anything other than holding it and having a drink? Did you think about the actual quality of the coffee, the beans, where it came from, where it was roasted, how it was roasted? Did you think about any of that? Probably not. Most people don't. How about now, if I ask you and I put a price with these cups of coffee, which one would you choose? Would you change your mind? So there's at least 1 or 2 people that would change, because sometimes it's just not worthwhile paying $5 for that extra little pretty design the barista puts on, right? But sometimes it's worth it. When I asked my sister, remember she likes the number 2, I asked her, it was a little kind of a test. I said, so tell me about the coffee, your favorite cup of coffee. Why does it, what makes it call out to you? She started talking and she said, well, my favorite coffee shop has really nice, comfortable couches, and the baristas are really nice and they make me feel at home. And I said, stop for a sec, just stop. You're telling me about the ambiance of this coffee shop, nothing about the coffee itself. So for her, it's worthwhile paying $3.50 for the ambiance of the coffee shop and the nice foam. I don't know if she actually tasted the coffee, but those are the things that was interesting. Everybody has a different preference. So when we start talking about quality, you have to think about that perspective. So let's make it a little bit more real. This is an Amazon website. Don't know how much time you spend on Amazon, but think about how you would define quality for this website. What kinds of things would make it a quality product? Put it into the chat, some of the quality things that you would think. Usability, less ads, big on that one. Easy to access a search bar, simplicity, always available, easy to use, accurate search results. The company who made it, interesting. Simple to buy, fast, being able to buy the product. Pertinent search results. So not necessarily accurate, but pertinent. So there's a subtle difference there. So when we're thinking about quality of a website, we might think about things like easy to navigate or easy to find things, or which is kind of that search. We also want to be thinking about the risks. When we talk about quality, we should be starting with the risks, because when we know the risks, then we can start thinking about what quality attributes to test for, right? Are we really scared about ransomware? We might want to be these days, right? What other kinds of security? What happens if the material is out of date? Like, how frustrating is it when you search for something, you choose to buy it and they go, yeah, not there. No, nothing there, right? Even things like privacy. How do we make sure the pricing is correct? Are there other risks that you can think of that isn't listed on here? Put them in the chat. Kinds of risks. Transaction security. Yeah, privacy, security, seller scam. Yeah, that's a big one. And it's out there. For the seller rather than the closest. So how do we make sure we get the best seller, something that is, you know, closer, easier to turn? Availability, load, concurrent users. So when we start having that talk about risks, so the risk, things like availability, so the risk is actually, it goes down where we don't have it. So what we want to test is we want to test the availability. Same with number of concurrent users. The risk is actually the people who want to get on can't get on. So we do load testing, we do stress testing, we're checking for things like concurrent users. So thinking about the risk, what could go wrong? And testers are really good at those sorts of things. So ask those questions and then think about how you're going to test them. The other part of it is also thinking about which is the most important, because they can't all be the most important. You want to be able to prioritize them. What am I going to spend the most time testing? When we're looking at those different perspectives, and I think this is an excellent little cartoon, different people will look at it differently. So a story that I often tell, my grandchildren, many years ago, they're older now, but we were on a trip to Hawaii, and my grandson was probably about 3 at the time, maybe 4. And he said, he was out on the deck and he calls his dad over and he said, the cars, look, Dad, the cars are driving on the water. And my son-in-law said, no, Braden, they're not. They're driving on the bridge. And Braden was just absolutely sure. He said, no, they're driving on the water. And this went on for a little bit. And my grandson was almost in tears because he was so sure he was right. My granddaughter went out on the balcony. She's 6, maybe 7. And she was out there for 30 seconds and she goes, oh, boys, kind of thing. That was her attitude. She said, Dad, come here, kneel down. Look, see what Braden is looking at. Sure enough, it looked like the cars were driving on the water. She said, now pick him up and show him what's really happening. So Braden could see it. They were driving on the bridge, but the reflection from the glass on the balcony made it look different than it was. When you have people with different perspectives, you have to talk about it and say, what is the shared understanding? Can I look from that other side? Can I see what that other person is? Instead of sitting there and just saying, hey, that's not what I know. So when we think about risks, we also have to think about people's risk tolerance. I've been in many teams where I think something is a really high risk, but the product owner has decided it's not, because they actually understand the business better than I did. So we have to think about risk tolerances, but we have to bring them up for sure. So when we look at those different viewpoints again, we can look at it from the customers, we can look at it from the product value. Remember when I put the price on the coffee? It might make a difference. The value, is it worthwhile to pay $5? Is it worthwhile to pay, I don't even say $10,000 for a Rolex versus $50 for an Omega? What is the value you're getting? So you want to think of it from a customer perspective, but also from the product value. Thinking about, are we making enough profit to keep the company alive as well? But the process, that's what we are probably the most emphasis on. How do we build it? And how we build influences the quality of the product. They're not the same thing, but it influences. So if we look at that website again, right? There's going to be people who want, if we're going to think about customers, that want the latest details. There's people who want to buy quickly, repeat customers. My husband is a prime kind of person, right? He likes to go in and do the one-click shopping. I tend to spend a little bit more time looking and doing things. Different people, different perspectives, different risk tolerances. So when you're looking at it, you need to be thinking about what do people want, right? Do they want those hints of what they're going to buy? So when I'm looking at the browsing history page on Amazon, right? I can see everything I looked at lately, but I don't ever remember looking at bug killer. So, or mouse killer, I should say. So maybe that shouldn't be there. Why is it there? Do I really care enough to think about it? Maybe. But what I like about this page is I have some control over it. I can turn it on or off. I can remove everything else that I don't want people to see. So as testers, we need to think about looking differently, looking at the different quality attributes, thinking and asking the questions, stuff like privacy. What would people want? We have to look beyond the functionality. And that's where a lot of times we get stuck, right? We need to understand that quality perspective from all angles. So let's talk about process a little bit and get into it. Specifically looking at testing in a holistic way. So we want to think about building quality in, and we want to think about looking at it differently. And one of my favorite quotes of all times is this one from Elizabeth Hendrickson. Testing is not a phase. It's an activity that happens throughout the delivery cycle. And I've been using this quote for a lot of different years. And, you know, in our first book, we talked about whole team and testing early and lots of other things. People have been talking about shift left, shift right, shift up, shift down. All of those things are part of this. How do we test throughout? And if we go back to that coffee, thinking about the process includes the growing. It includes the altitude. Where is it grown? How high up the mountain? The time it's planted. It's about when it's picked. It's about roasting. Do you like it light, medium, dark, dry, or with a little bit of oil on it? And the process continues right until we serve the coffee, the operations, right? So it starts with the environment and continues right through until the barista puts that pretty design on, if that's the kind of coffee you want, right? The customer takes their first sip. It's the taste, the ambiance. That's what's going to help them perceive the quality. And how they perceive it is different for everyone. So it's hard. So when we shift our whole mind from testing after to testing throughout, it makes a difference, right? We might write detailed tests before we code, but only performing the testing afterwards, that's a lot of people's mindset. And that's what we want to change, so that we're testing throughout. Dan Ashby took that typical DevOps cycle, which has some of them have no mention of testing. Some of them have a little phase in there that says testing, which drives me crazy. And he put out this picture. And I used this picture for quite a long time. His continuous testing in DevOps loop. We test here, 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 and here, and all the way through. The one thing I didn't like about it so much was the detail to the branching, the coding, the merging, and the build. I felt there was too much emphasis on that. So I came up with this. I took that infinite loop, which is, I think, how we should describe development. And I wanted to think about it from a testing perspective, using Dan Ashby's idea of we test here and here. So typically a development cycle would start at the discover stage, right? What do we want to build? We plan at a high level, we seek to understand. I saw somebody's little note on their picture here that said, I don't know who it was, that said an accurate document doesn't replace shared understanding or something like that. Absolutely true, right? So even if we build it and it's really good, and if it's the wrong thing, it doesn't help anybody. So the building aspect of it, that's the coding, testing, right? What we actually do when we build it. Then we deploy it, release it, observe it. We want to know how our customers use it. Hopefully we learn something and can improve our process. And then we move on to discover new things, maybe about that particular feature, maybe about something completely different. So I've put some pauses in here as well to kind of say we need to slow down sometimes to reflect, not a gate, but are we actually ready to build? Do we understand? Do we know that the cars are really driving on the bridge and not on the water? Do we have that common understanding? So we want to pause. So we move kind of from the left to the right and back and forth. It's continuous. So does that kind of make sense to you folks? Do you have any questions? You can raise your hand and we can just talk about it if you do right now before I move on. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. Okay, Jose?
Yes, we very often we talked about testing at different phases of the project. But very often we tend to think that only QA or testers are the one doing the testing. In development, the developers can very well do most of the testing. Actually, unit testing, they should have, it should be in place. So testing should be done. Our role is to make sure that it's done properly and documented properly, so we know it's there and we can rely on it and learn from it.
I'm not sure I agree with that. Our role is to document it to make sure that it is. I think it's everybody's role to understand what it is and what do they need to do so that it's there for people to understand. But there is some truth to it too. Okay, so let's talk about these different stages. And I'm going to call it a stage, not a phase, because phase always, to me, means handoffs. So if we think about testing, and Jose, I agree with you, everybody needs to test all the way through. So if we look at discovery, right, this is where we kind of start. And you think about testing there. It's the business folks. They're determining whether the idea has value. Does it make sense from a business perspective? And then if an organization doesn't have consistent messaging, this is sometimes where we get a lot of confusion and competing priorities. So we can use tools like impact mapping. The testing is by the business folks at this point in time. We could influence and ask questions, but really it's the business people this early in the stage. Oops, I hit 2 at once. If we go into planning, this is really where we're testing early. And it will be developers and it will be testers and it will be business folks. But testers can add a lot of value by using their critical thinking skills, asking what if questions, surfacing those risks, right? We want to understand what is the most important thing. Maybe facilitating a risk storming exercise if a feature has many unknowns. Helping to break down features into testable stories. That's a huge win, right? But also thinking about the quality attributes at that time too. Do we have to test for security, scalability? And you'll find that there's a lot of time one-to-one quality attributes to risks, maybe more. So if we think about our Amazon, maybe we need to ask if we're trying to integrate a new product line and we've started shipping to, I don't know, Antarctica. What's a risk, right? How are we going to get there? What happens if there's storms? Like we can ask those questions. What are the safeguards we're going to put in? It doesn't mean we have to decide how to do it, right? But how are we going to calculate those delivery charges? Understanding to me is where a lot of teams don't spend enough time. We're wanting to get that story ready for building. We want to understand the scope of the story, right? We want to think about things like test data. So practices like acceptance test-driven development or BDD, those things help. Example mapping to help understand business rules, right? But we're also going to need the domain folks, the business people to help us. The programmers can help think about what kind of instrumentation they're going to need to, say, monitor and for monitoring or observing for observability. This all happens before we start coding. So in the building, right, that's where we build, we code, we automate, we test, not necessarily in that order. Programmers can help automate the tests, unit tests for sure, but API level tests, tests through the UI, whatever we want to do. but we work together, and it's really important that we collaborate, right? Always looking for the fastest feedback. So things like, I call it show me. Other people have called it a desk check, where a programmer might say, Janet, can I show you this? I just finished this story. And I'll go sit and pair with the programmer and look at that story, and we will test together, trying to get fast feedback, fixing things as fast as we can, as soon as we can. And then deploy. The code has been written, we're deploying to development test environments, maybe even prod. A strong deployment pipeline is so important. And we'll see a lot of automation helping us there. But maybe there's human-centric testing as well, things like exploratory testing. I just saw a little note come up on the chat, time is money. So I'm going to address that one, because a lot of people push off testing to the end, thinking that they're going to save money, but they don't. It's pay me now, pay me later. Because if you test at the end, what's going to happen is you're going to have lots of bugs. Your code is not going to be as clean. You're going to build in technical debt. And so a lot of times, just by talking about it, to say, hey, this is what we expect. Can we try moving our testing earlier for one iteration or two? Can we do it with a couple of stories, see how it works, right? Those sorts of things is how I deal with objections. Let's try it, and I can do it. And absolutely, rework, introduce more risks, absolutely, which is why we want to get it right the first time if we can, when the programmers are in the code and they know the code. So when we're in the pipeline, we have to think about the infrastructure, right? How can we make it as simple as possible? How do we get stable test environments, right? Spinning up test environments into the cloud is so much easier these days if teams have access to those sorts of things. And then releasing to production. Our customers are actually using them. How do we do risk? So how we deploy to production, how we test in production, all of those things, we can mitigate risks, but we have to have a really good, sorry, I've just lost my words, a really good strategy for doing that. I know there's lots of different ways, but we want to be thinking about mitigating risks all the time. We observe, we monitor. How do we know what our customers are doing? How do we know what they're finding frustrating? How do we know what we want to get better at? Can we detect errors before the customers, right? Context is everything. So unless you're Google and testing Google Maps or testing Google Drive or something that's not critical, and it's okay if your customers find the bugs, you may want to put a lot more effort in earlier, right? So testing in production is about observing. It's about being able to find things earlier. It is not about leaving testing to your customers. And then the last thing in this loop, and almost the most important thing, is learning. If we don't learn, and this is where the faster the loop, the faster we can implement changes or adaptations. If our loop is too long, we've made too many mistakes, perhaps. So this is what I call holistic testing loop, the model. These are examples of the kinds of testing we can do all the way through. They're not the only things, but they are a lot of different ideas, and it's not about testers testing. It's about everybody. So the left side is really about understanding. It's about preventing defects in the code. Not always trackable, right? But quite often, I'll be sitting in a meeting and we'll be discussing something. And if I hear a programmer say, oh, I never thought of that, we've likely prevented a defect in code. Raise it up, say, hey, yeah, we just prevented a defect, right? Talk about it. Make people realize that's what's happening. We also need to test the code. And the right side is really about finding those defects. How do we get them? How do we find them? How do we fix them early, right? The right side's about observing. And it is more expensive, always. Any questions about this model? I'm going to open it up to questions. We'll have questions. But have that conversation, because once we know what we want to test, once we know our risks, then we can start planning our testing activities to match that, to support the level of quality we want. It's the culture. You got somebody has a question. I'll just finish this quick. Okay. Yep.
What's a blue-green environment?
Blue-green environment is we have two production environments. So one will be blue, one will be green. You can call them anything you want. They are identical, but the blue one is turned on for production right now. And the green one is where we're testing, right? We're adding a new feature. And as soon as we say this is good, we shut this one down and turn this one on. And then the blue one becomes. Okay. So organizations need that culture of quality, right? And that means the whole team, not just the testers. We need to think about what relationships do we need to make, right? We want to think about how people can work together. We want to make fast feedback, because that's how we can keep things moving along. And I find visualization, getting up on a whiteboard or using a Miro board or whatever other tool you have, drawing is huge, helps understanding. And the last thing is, don't be afraid to experiment. And to do that, teams have to have a level of safety in their organization. And sometimes that's a lot harder than you would think, but it's really important. And that is, this is how you can get a hold of me if you have any questions. But I'm going to open it up for questions, and I can be here as long as anybody wants to stay and ask questions. Okay, I'll stop sharing then so I can get you all folks on the
I think there is one question from Josie.
Okay, I think that might be left over too.
Maybe.
It's actually left over.
Okay, so I'll open it up for questions, any kind of questions. Doesn't necessarily even have to be about this particular presentation.
Actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
Where I work, a Scrum Master introduced the principle of Tshaping, which I found very interesting. But a lot of people, or mostly management people, see it more as you should be able to do different job, everything, and you should not have to get to request the input of someone outside of the group, because the group should be autonomous.
So the key there is the group, right? So from a group perspective, for each individual, I'm T-shaped. I have across the back, across that top T, I have lots of different skills. I can do a little bit of load testing. I can do a little bit of stress testing. I can do some automation. I can do this. I can do that. I can do this. But the deep part, my depth, is process. I love working with process and making it as simple as I can be. That's my strength, right? Doesn't mean that I can't do a little bit of everything. It just doesn't mean that I'm maybe perfect. I like to tell this story. It's of Lisa's team. They were missing business analyst skills on their team. So they had a couple of choices. They could have gone out and hired a business analyst, but what they chose to do was, as a team, try to figure out how to get those skills. So they started doing they started reading books and sharing and having meetings, or not meetings, but workshops on how to get those skills. They built the skills up within the team. They became self-sufficient. So from a team perspective, if you can identify those things and say, you know what, we're missing this skill. Maybe I have to go borrow it for a while because Jose knows how to do load testing, but how can our team get that into our team and get better at it? And I think that's important.
Okay, that's actually pretty much how it was explained to us. But in our reality is we don't, when we need something, we need it for the current sprint or the next one.
Yep.
I do share my knowledge, and I do help other people to do different tasks whenever I can, and I try to learn. But usually what I would say is like, I'm doing the testing part. If I've done all the analysis, I have all my test cases, everything is documented properly, anybody can do the execution.
Well, I do not
No?
believe that. I do not believe that. I don't.
Okay. Then
Plain and simple, because how I'm going to interpret is going to be different than what you do. And those test cases that you've just written all out for somebody, in 2 months, they're going to be out of date, and somebody's going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out if it's the code that's wrong or the test case that's wrong. In my experience, that's what I've seen. So, David, you have a question. I'm not saying, it's just me. I've just not seen it work.
it's fine. It's fine.
David, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. First, thank you very much, Janet, for joining us today. It's an honor to be able to hear you speak after reading some of your books. My question is, I'm looking at job postings nowadays. It looks like manual testing is kind of going out of fashion, and we're looking at more and more job postings that are looking for automation skills.
I know.
As a manual tester, how would you future-proof a bit your career with those changes coming?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I really think that, and I don't call it manual testing. I call it human-centric, because human-centric puts the human back into it, and that's why we do exploratory testing. So there's a couple of things that I encourage people to do. First is be able to articulate why human-centric testing is important, exploratory testing and things, why. The second thing is learn a coding language. You don't necessarily need to know how to write it at the beginning, but learn how to read it, learn what it's about. Take something simple, like I would start with a code like Ruby or Python or something that doesn't need to be compiled. It can just be run. But learn. There's lots of online courses and lots of things that you can do. But have that in it's one of those things that looking forward, if you have that, you can learn it. I wouldn't go and say, I'm going to go learn Java, because the next place you're going, they might not be using Java. They might use something different. But learning how code works is huge. I find, and I really encourage teams to collaborate. And the best experiences that I've had in automation is when the programmers and the testers collaborate. So I have worked in, for example, a team. I specified the tests in our tool that we were using in one organization, we actually used it so that I could specify my tests in an Excel spreadsheet. We were doing utility trading. So my tests did things like, what time of day are we buying? What day, what month, lots of different inputs, right? And so our tests could be read in, but the programmers are the ones who wrote the actual code, the automation code that took those tests and ran them. The tests, the specifications were done by the testers, but the actual automation code were written by the programmers who know how to write code. And they write it better than I ever could. So I programmed for 6 years, many years ago. I would not hire me to program anymore. I can automate, maybe, but I wouldn't hire me to program because I will never be as good a programmer as they would. But I like to pair with them because then they get better at understanding the tests. And if we pair to automate, then I know that their code is going to pass those tests because we did that first. So each team is different, but that truly is my favorite way.
Thank you.
Okay, Mauro, I'm sorry, how do you say your name?
Yeah,
How do you
Mauro,
say
Mauro, it's correct.
Mauro,
Ma-
okay.
Mauro in French.
Mauro.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
you're the person with that. You're the person with the sign that says we don't need an accurate document. We need a shared understanding. Thank you. That's on your background.
That's me. So sorry, I turned off the video because
No, that's good.
I look the network was struggling.
Yep.
No, just to add some comments to the person that said that the manual testing is kind of disappearing. I understood like that, but I guess
The job ads, yes.
yeah. But I guess that what really we need to move to forget the idea that quality is just testing.
Mhm.
Personally, for example, I work closer to the developers, and for example, well, it's their task to write the unit test. But for me, it's if your unit tests are not readable, human readable, for me, even if the code works properly, for me it's a lack of quality there.
Mhm.
Okay, why? Because after a while, I need to quantify, for example, the kind of test that we did. We need to map or to expose in Jira, whatever, etc. And well, I cannot automatically expose them to be accessible for the product owners, analysts, QAs.
Yeah.
No. So, well, I guess that the only thing that we need to do or to move is to put aside the mindset that we need just to test, but to move and to look at the quality is it's built.
Yeah. So in one team that I was on, and it really was my very first true agile team, I was one tester with 12 to 14 programmers. So I was more of a coach, a consultant there. I did lots of the testing too, but what I did was I paired a lot with the programmers. So when they would write their unit tests, they were doing extreme programming and they were doing a great job. But they were still learning as well. So they would write their unit tests, and I would pair with them, and we would talk about what other kinds of unit tests would they need, what else could they do. And so they got better at it. I shared my experiences with them. To me, that was building quality, and because we were sharing. It also meant that their unit tests had to be readable by me. And unit tests the title should be able to tell you what it's doing. In fact, any test, I believe that each test should have one purpose. And if I can't tell by the title of the test what that purpose is, I'm probably going to say it's a bad test. Because I want to be able to see it. I can go in and look at it in more detail. What are we testing? And I will start with that purpose and write my test. But yes, it starts much earlier in that understanding. Jose, did you have another question? I see your hand up still, or again. Nope. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Jean-Francois. Yes. You're muted.
I let others ask questions, but I have one for you. I think it was in the media recently about AI, ChatGPT. How do you foresee the artificial intelligence impacting the QA job?
Keep an open mind, think critically. I don't think we're anywhere close to AI taking over our jobs at this point in time. I truly don't. There can be times when it could help you, but I don't think it's going to take over our jobs anytime soon.
Do you think the AI can help doing
I think it might be able to. I'm not an expert in it, but some of the things that I've seen and read, but always think critically about what it's suggesting and what it's doing, because AI, as we know it, or as we'd like to think about it, really doesn't exist, right? They're learning, it's machine learning. And if it's got wrong data, it's going to give you wrong answers. So always just kind of use it as a tool, but be careful. Someday it might be there, but yeah. But I'm not an expert on it either. I'll tell you that now.
Thank you. If I can have another question about the future of the profession, how do you see 2023 and beyond? Is there a holistic approach? Is it something that you think that will take place more and more?
Change happens slowly. And there are teams that don't need testers. Their programmers are truly excellent programmers, and they test all their own things, which my very first job as a programmer, that's what we did. And that was back in 1991. We didn't have testers. We had to test our own things. So there are teams like that, but they're few and far between. I still think that testers have a role. I like to see at least one tester on every team, even if they're not doing all the testing, even if they're there as a coaching role, like I kind of was on that first Agile team I was on, consultant role, helping the team to learn. I think that testers have to be very open to new challenges. So if somebody said future-proof, learn a language, a programming language. It's not going to hurt, right? Doesn't mean you might be an automator. If you don't like automation, then don't go for those kinds of jobs. There's still lots of them that need those human-centric kind of testing or consulting kinds of roles. But it's good to have it in your toolkit. So learn a little bit about it so that you can make a choice whether or not you like it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is because every team is different. Every organization, every product is different. So that T-shaped skills that we were talking about earlier, if I'm in a data warehousing project, for example, my SQL and my database knowledge better be right up to speed. I better understand data integrity really, really well. But if I'm doing a website, maybe not so much. maybe I have to learn different skills. So learning to figure out what those are, I think that's being adaptable is a huge win. And that's where to be. Other questions? Thanks, Julie, for putting that blue-green up in the chat.
Pleasure. I see we have David that's raised his hand once again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've decided to double dip there. Why not?
Sure.
I'm in an organization that's in the midst of implementing its own quality culture. I think it was something that was kind of lacking for us, and we're. I see that I'm getting a little bit of struggles with that. I'm wondering if you had any kind of roadblocks or impediments that you faced or you've learned that that could help us overcome. One of the concerns I have is that I don't want to burn out the developers and make them tired of hearing about quality, because Scrum Masters have their initiatives that are bringing in, POs have their things they want to do, and I'm one extra piece in the puzzle, and I really don't want to burn them out, and I want it to be successful. And I'm wondering if you had any advice for me or any experiences that you'd like to share with that in that regard.
Yeah, so I like to take things small steps, right? So if I'm introducing something, I will introduce something very small that's easy for them to do. And so things like that show me, right? The fast feedback. Something like that is huge. It's a huge win by just going and getting that demo and asking questions when it's still in the developer's hands. That's such a big win. Another easy thing to do is I will take, and in every meeting that I'm in about a particular story, for example, whether it's a backlog refinement meeting or whatever you call them, for every story, I start making notes about what I'm going to test. Just variations, not test cases, but just things like if I was going to test password, I would test, for special characters, I would test for leading and trailing blanks. I would test for just all those things. And I'm just making a list so that when we walk out of the iteration planning meeting, I've got a really good idea. And I might look at it a little more and do some other things, figuring out what I've missed. But I'm going to take that list, and it'll be a paper list. I'm still a paper fan, right? I will take that list and I will sit down with the programmer or programmers, and I'm going to go, these are the things I'm going to test for. Can you think of anything I've missed? Right? And they're going to add things because they're going to start thinking about it. They don't realize you are changing how they think about what they're going to write. You are influencing with huge wins. And over time, you'll find that they're going to start saying, oh, Janet, things like these leading and trailing blanks and these special characters, we're going to test as unit tests. You don't need to, right? That's going to come naturally. So rather than using a hammer, I try to do small things like that. Another thing that I find has been very useful for me is doing assessments. And in fact, I just wrote a book with Selena DeLisi, and we wrote about how we think about the quality assessment. But what it does is it opens up people to all of the things that go into building that quality culture, and they start paying attention more. You can't win everything all at once. So starting small, picking one thing from a team perspective is also a good thing, right? And when I say the team, I'm talking product owner, scrum master. Let's the team choose what the team is going to work on next to improve the quality. But from an individual, you can do all those little things on your own. And just because they're subtle, they're small.
Thank you.
There's one question from Anu.
Okay.
Hi, Janet. So I'm a Scrum Master and I just came
Yeah.
up meeting. And both of my teams have 4 developers, one manual tester and one automated tester.
Mhm.
Of course, we have more development that can be done because of this ratio. And so I'm trying to teach them for the developer to do some more tests. So the writing by the QA and the execution by the team developer T-shape. And, you know, we struggle to deliver every sprint. And so my pain point is that the QAs do not want to share the work. And so, yeah, protective and like they appreciate the help, but it's like, what's the next step? How to
So there's a trust level, right? They're missing the trust. And so part of it might be and yeah, Julie says let go of control. Exactly. But testers have had that control for so long that it's really hard to say quality is not my job, it's the whole team's job. But you might start with doing something and keeping it simpler, like instead of the whole test cases, think about variations, what to test. Get some exploratory test charters for the programmers to do, or do things like pairing, getting that programmer and tester to pair that desk check, that show me. One of the things, when I first introduced that to one team, and that was that first Agile team, it was a couple of months later, and the programmers paired, always paired. It was great. But I was walking behind this one pair and they didn't see me. And one of the programmers said to the other one, so we're finished this story. Are you going to check it in? And the first programmer looked and he said, not quite yet. I have to do my Janet test first. And I went, yes, because what had happened was by me going through and pairing with them and asking questions and showing them what could be done, they wanted to make sure that they did their due diligence before they said, Janet, come over, right? And it's those little things that help. But the testers have to realize that they're not going to lose their jobs if they let go. And that's a fear that a lot of testers have because it's happened in so many teams. Programmers can do all the testing. We don't need testers. So you have to get rid of that fear, and it's a real fear, and it's a true fear in many cases.
Thank you.
I think, Anouk, maybe something else that I'd like to add from some of the things I've tried as well is questioning the time of delivery, right? So if the QA is requesting 2 weeks to test everything or whatnot, we know now with CI/CD that we want this continuous development and delivery to production. We want to get it out quickly for quicker feedback. Like maybe you can show them and evaluate the time and say, so how can we improve? Why don't we have confidence? Where are we testing so far down the line? How do we test earlier on? And then you're kind of pinpointing to improvements that the team can make instead of just trying to break these false perceptions that we now have, because it's been years of it's QA's fault. How come you didn't see it? Blah, blah, blah. So we have that, it's like it's burnt in all of our beliefs. And so it's like it's hard for people to see otherwise. So now it's kind of our job to try and bring metrics or something that will make them realize, oh, damn, the old ways of doing things maybe don't work now that the contexts have changed. Yeah. So my 2 cents.
And I think that you said something really important there, Julie. It's how can we fix it? Not you going in and saying, do this, do that, but us as a team, how can we address this problem? Right? And we being the whole team.
Thank you, Julie.
All right.
David Alexandre.
Yes, just want to do a little pushing on the idea that you've said about learning code for testers, and it's something that I personally experienced, and it kind of just to do some pushing.
Yep.
It really opened it. I think it's that moment where developers opened their not just their mind, but just opened to me and reached out to me after and started. Be interested in my opinion and showing me code even before going into reviews. Because whenever they start understanding that you kind of understand code or you know where it's going and you start asking questions, they kind of want to the ones I deal with opened like that. They kind of were like, let's help him to grow in there. He understand the code. We can bring him a little higher. And he kind of understood that, well, I'm going to show him and we're going to talk about it. And then I'm not going to see that story come back to me as a reward. So I think that specific moment was kind of where magic happened. So yeah, I'm pushing on this to try to learn a little bit of code.
Yep, it does. It helps that communication. Thank you for sharing.
And Janet, you already have a blog? And if we want to follow you, is it possible to do it somewhere? Is it on Dragonfire? Can you share that to us?
Yeah, so it's I have several things. I'm just going to share my screen again. That's the easiest way to do it. Hang on. I have blogs on Agile testing, agiletester.ca. That's my personal blog. I talk about process mostly. I have blogs on agiletestingfellow.com. There we talk about all kinds of different things. Lisa and I share that blog. My actual website is janetgregoryca.ca, or CA, not Dragonfire. But yes, and you can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm on Twitter. I haven't moved off Twitter yet, but on LinkedIn, email me. I love to get email. It's a nice, easy email address to get at me.
Thank you. I'm receiving every month. We can receive your email or your blog every month in our email. So it's easier to get that for everybody if you want to know more. And also with the community of practice in Quebec, if you want to know more, to be involved, you can go to Agile Quebec and then see the community of practice, and then you can start interacting. I think it's important, and I know maybe you know that too, Janet, but if we are able, and I think it's coming from your idea. I wrote something about what you said about we didn't know if we're working alone, and working in group is where you develop the holistic approach and all other approach. Is it true?
Yes, it is true. You can't do it alone. You see something and you socialize it. That's the best way to do it is you socialize it, then people give you feedback, and yes, absolutely.
So I think why it's important to be part of a community, and then to share ideas, to test ideas, see what is working, what is not. So it's why we try to create a community of practice. So you come from all other companies, you see something else, so you can test it, you can share your ideas.
Exactly, because that sharing is how everybody gets better.
Perfect. Any other question before we leave? And thank you for your time, Janet. If there's any other questions, now it's time. Oh, I think there's one last question, and
Charles.
Charles.
Yeah, hello, Janet.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah. The question came up late, but I was watching I was checking your graph about the loop, like the build, develop, deploy, release, etc., and the different testing activities there. So my question was like about it's related maybe to the level of maturity of a team in a project, and maybe I reformulate. So let's say you would start a project from scratch from day one. Okay, where would you put the more focus on these different testing activities to first focus on and then expand? Because like from my point of view, like let's say we're on a project and we're here on a scale of this maturity, and we say, okay, we want to do all this. So what would be the best approach, like to tackle first and would give the most value to the project? I don't know if
yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that. I am going to tell you a story though.
Okay.
I love stories. So I was working with a team, and this team has been working together for a long time. The product owners had gone off and worked and created a bunch of stories, and they'd done things. They'd talked to the team. The team had, at least the leads in the team had talked with them. And they were going to present this feature, this brand new feature. It was a pretty big one to this team. And they had all the stories ready. They were all ready to go. They had all of this. And so I was listening to this, and I said, you know what, before we actually bring it to the team, I think this might be a good time to just step backwards a second, because now you understand this feature, so you can answer the questions of the team. Let's do a mind mapping exercise on this feature. So the team doesn't really know anything yet, right? Just a little bit of information, that's all they know. So we did a mind mapping about the feature on a Miro board, so we're all remote. The product owner give a little spiel, a talk on what this feature was, what was the vision, what they were trying to do. And then we started mind mapping the feature. So we started with just the focus point, and the team just started drawing. So other things, right? They'd say something, and then people would ask questions, and they would go off and mind map this whole thing. And we did it for about 45 minutes. It was a big feature. And at the end of that 45 minutes, by asking questions, what if, what about this? So no detail, they took that feature and they said, we can't build it yet. There are way too many unknowns. Now, if they had taken that and done what they normally did, they would have gotten partway through there and realized that they couldn't do it. And they would have had big blocking stories, and it would have been a mess. But there were some very basic questions that hadn't been answered. The power of the team. So that was testing. It's testing the ideas, testing the understanding at a high level. That was critical. Because it doesn't matter how good you test, once it gets into the team, there still would have been so many things wrong with that feature that instead of the 3 months it was supposed to take, I would have said it was going to take 6 to 8 months, because there would have been tons of rework, right?
Yeah. Okay. So really the plan activity would be your first focus. So I guess it would go from there on the loop. So you start with the planning, and then like the first maybe instinct will be okay, the unit testing is the first kind of testing that first impact the code, but there's the planification before, of course.
Yeah.
And there's the like maybe after unit testing, like there's the QA part where most like useful. I mean, impliqué. I don't know the word in English. Anyway, but then afterward, like all the other testing activities I was looking at, so like all the observe and the learn, and like it feels like things that will be extra, like more like really cool things to have, but it's not like the first focus often on a project.
So do you know what QA stands for me? Doesn't stand for quality assurance, because I don't think you can assure quality. Question asker. If a tester doesn't do anything else but ask questions early, it's a win for everybody.
That's a good point. That's a good quality for a
Yeah,
tester.
and that's a testing activity. It's a testing activity.
Question asker. I'll take
Yeah.
note of this.
It makes way more sense than me. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you.
Okay.
It's helpful.
So it's like the 5 whys. Why?
Yeah.
What if?
Pretend you're two. Pretend you're two. All right.
That's perfect.
Yannick,
Yeah,
one
sorry.
more question, I think.
Désolé, I'm very late too. I'm just looking at the same graphic Charles was talking about, the holistic testing loop. It seems like they could be all the tests you've described there. They could be really mapped onto the testing quadrant. I don't know what you call it.
Yeah, I know. I've thought about that. I haven't done a blog post on that particular thing, but you could kind of map it to the quadrants, I think. So the planning, the asking questions, the understanding, those are kind of quadrant 2 things, right? When you get into the building, you start getting more into some of the quadrant 3 stuff, but you will have some of the quadrant 1 unit testing stuff. So yeah, you could map them.
Yeah, it makes sense. Good. Thanks.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Janet. I think I will talk it. I will say that it's a day, so I will call it a day, and we can start from there. And maybe next time we will come back at the holistic testing. And if we have more questions, now we have your email, so we can ask you the question directly.
Please do. Absolutely.
Perfect. So thank you everyone. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup tout le monde d'avoir assisté à la communauté de pratique. Puis j'espère vous revoir. On va continuer à vous communiquer avec vous. Puis on a un Slack avec lequel on va pouvoir communiquer et continuer à échanger. Donc je vais vous inviter, si vous êtes intéressé, vous pouvez joindre cette communauté-là.